1:30.
1:30. Okay, so somebody could let me know when we're about 10 minutes away from the end. And the thing is, I'd really like all of you to pop in with questions and discussions and everything like that and make this as interactive as possible. But what I'd like to do is start by having everybody close their eyes for what will seem like an uncomfortably long time, but I'll tell you when to open them, okay? So just close your eyes. Okay, just to save time, and I sometimes keep people going for 2 and 3 minutes, and anyway, but anyway, what I'd like to start with is asking you, what did you hear? Name all of the things that you heard when you had your eyes closed. I heard someone breathing. Breathing, okay.
The air conditioning.
Okay, what else?
Rustling paper.
Rustling paper.
Voices outside.
Voices outside.
Echoes in the hallway.
Echoes in the hallway.
My grocery list.
Yeah. Oh, in your head. Yeah, the noise in your head. Anybody else?
I actually thought I heard a plane taking off, but that was just the way that the whole background seemed to be meshed together.
You have an imaginative sensibility. Yeah. This is good. Yes, because sounds can sometimes be other than what we think they are. So I guess my reason for pointing that out is, first of all, okay, now I want to ask you, if you were to do an interview in this room, what do you think the overall tone would be? What would the sound communicate?
Maybe more of the air conditioning.
Okay, yeah. Anybody else? What would the tone be like, you think, when you're recording?
I think it might be a little hollow. I don't know.
Hollow. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, the reason, and I'm going to play something right now. I'll tell you a bit first about what a sound walk is. A sound walk is something that I didn't invent this myself. It's something which comes out of a project at Simon Fraser University in the 1970s by the Canadian composer Armory Schafer. Do you know who Schafer is? Anyway, he is a musical composer, but he is equally a sociologist of sound, and he incorporates a lot of ambient sound in his performances, does a lot of unusual things with sound. And so in the 1970s, he set up a project at Simon Fraser to document the disappearing sounds of the world. And what they did was they went around, they went to Europe, I think it was primarily Europe and North America, but there's a very, very large sound bank of sounds which a lot of them have disappeared. You know, we can think of right now, I'm thinking about, the little balls and the gas machine, the gas pumps and the clicking of a lot of church bells are now gone because people are complaining about that. And so there are noise bylaws and things like that. So the upshot of that is a group of people grew out of the Soundscape project that are very, very aware of the quality of our environment. And there's been a couple of outgrowth organizations, the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology, WFAE.org. If you just look up World Forum Acoustic Ecology, you'll find it on the website. There's a Canadian group of which I'm a member called the Canadian Association of Sound Ecology. And so this is kind of where the soundscape trend and practice that I'm involved in stemmed from. And I mean, there are a lot of people who do this kind of thing, but this is specifically my artistic lineage. Soundwalking forms a very, very central form of my audio practice, in that for me, it's like intense listening and being very, very focused when you listen is very, very much part of the compositions that I do. And also the awareness of just how sound influences and impacts our production and what it communicates to our listeners is also really important. So sound walks are things you can do by yourself, and all it is just very, very focused listening and being very aware of every sound. Now, there are a couple of terms that are going to come up. These are a couple of little clips from a sound walk I did in Nairobi in the fall, a very different Nairobi than exists right now. I was doing a workshop it's an organization called Internewton.
Sorry, before you
Yeah.
continue, mind if I record?
No, go ahead. Yeah, thank you for asking, but no,
I'm sorry.
No.
I didn't ask you on.
Yeah, well, that it's not a problem, but yeah.
Well, you're on the internet. So
Yeah, exactly. So I was in Nairobi, and I was invited to do a presentation at an international organization called the International Association of Women in Radio and Television. Phenomenal organization because 2/3 of their membership are women from the developing world, and you don't get that in most communication organizations. Internews is an organization that invited me to do a soundwalk after the fact because they've been to one of my soundwalks at the conference. And so Internews is an international American NGO that sets up news bureaus in the developing world to help journalists in these countries do their craft better. And they have studios and they have workshops and things like that. So I had a group of 13 people, and all of them were African. The one woman you'll hear is South African. And we're going to start right now with, this isn't tightly edited, so there'll be some stuff that, anyway, it's fairly short though. But we're going to start in the studio, which everybody usually thinks is an ideal environment, but it's very interesting to hear what their response after hearing them in the studio, and then we're going to go outside. Okay, so, there we go.
Yes, change. And the transition was in the corridor.
They're talking about transitions that they heard from one space to another.
There's a different sound, but it's not that sound. Actually, the hum becomes overwhelming because there's nothing else. Yeah.
You get to hear more of the hum than something else.
But only after a while. In the beginning, it sounds like there's absolutely nothing. Yeah.
So are you saying the quietness is too much that you're feeling it?
Yeah.
Is that the hum you're looking at?
Yeah, it makes me feel stressed. So much quietness.
Like when you said that the room was so quiet you could hear the sound of my pin.
Yeah, this time is good.
Okay. It reminds me of the quiet people when you hear bad news or something like that. You know, that kind of something's about to be announced.
When there's a soundtrack and then all of a sudden it's okay, you expect something.
They show surprise on somebody's face and
something bad is
Okay.
I don't like it.
Well, it's nice.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to music in the dark?
It's making I didn't get closer.
So anyway, what I found very, very interesting was they decided they hated the sound of their own studio. This is something that I find absolutely fascinating because my own aesthetic is real life happens out there. It doesn't happen in a radio studio. So what I do is I go out and do whatever I can to bring the world out there into the studio where I process it, but I try not to generate the material inside. So anyway, here's just a little sampling of how the sound changes. And you'll hear the term...
Can I ask you why you're saying that? Why is there an assumption that the sound that you want to make is all manufactured inside the studio? Is that what you're saying?
I come from a radio context, and the radio context in which I work is one where people don't get outside very often. And I think that in TV stations that's the case where, yes, there is a lot of stuff that happens outside, but a lot of stuff happens inside the studio. And I think as podcasters, one thing that's really, really creative about what's happening is we're not hidebound by these conventions. There is an assumption that studio sound is always best. That seems to be an assumption that pervades the broadcast industry because it's controlled. Yeah. So it's like what I love is the uncontrollability of environments that are not like in the studio. Here's just a little bit more so you can hear the sound change as we step outside, and I'll just play little bits of it. We're now walking down a stairwell and starting to go outside.
I think this is a transition. I think you'll get.
We're spotting where are the transition places and where has there been a global change, which means a totally new environment. And that's quite relevant to the composition because you want to know where you're it's like a film kind of thing. You know, when you're moving through and it's a panning shot, it's different than when you're in one place that's fixed.
When I see you, I'm very surprised because I thought this would be traffic, but it's people, I hear.
Lots of people talking.
Lots of engines, car engines, and footsteps.
Very interesting, but it's too long.
To hear how they're using the written story, not that right now. Okay. What's really interesting is this particular group was an exceptional group to work with because they weren't just listening and saying this is what the sound is. They're also saying this is the quality of the sound and this is the effect that it creates. Like when they say it's a warm sound, you know, that's different than something which is a very cold sound. And they said it's friendlier than I thought it would be. And that's what's really interesting about just listening sometimes and separating away the visuals. And sometimes what we would do is they would say, I detect a transition here. And I would go, okay, did you detect that transition because you heard it or because you saw it? And sometimes it's like, I used to do an event which I want to start doing again, the Sound Arts Camp up in the Ottawa Valley where we would get together in the bush, 25 of us. Canada Council was very, very nice about giving us money to do this. And so we went out and we would have lectures and workshops in the morning. We would have a lot of things that we would do together as joint projects. Night times we're listening. The food was great. To have little studios in the bush was just like such a group of seven kind of modern kind of thing. It was really, really wonderful. But one of the things that we used to do was we used to do sound walks where we would go in pairs and one person would either have a blindfold on or we had one of the CD sets, the radio programs that I did on various kinds of sound art has Chris Brooks, who is a very, very well-known producer who's done a lot of work with CBC, wearing these sunglasses that have been taped over with green masking tape. So he looked like this green bug. But the thing is, when you block out the sight, you hear differently. And sometimes I think that's what we need to do in order to really, really understand what our listeners are hearing. And that's one thing that Soundwalking will do is it helps you to focus in on your ears. Ironically, it also makes your eyesight sharper too. And I see an awful lot better once I focus on my sight after I've been focusing on my hearing, because it's a way of waking up your senses. Donna?
I just want to say what I liked about that little clip was that I could picture, where they were on the street with the people talking in the cars, but yet I could hear the voices very clearly. And I think where people, maybe I don't know if you're going to talk about this, where sometimes people make use of ambient sound where then you can't hear the person talking.
That is the important thing, and that's where, first of all, given a choice, I will always interview a person where there is ambient sound, provided it's appropriate ambient sound. Like, for example, here's another little bit that I recorded this in, I'll see if you can spot where I recorded this. But this is the kind of thing, it's ambient sound which would work in certain contexts, but not in others. If I were just to say, I want a traffic scape, then this would be. Might be kind of generic and useful for a wider range of things you might find no in a very specific place. So listen and think of place here. That's a bit distinctive horn, isn't it? Don't have many of those in North America. examples, but could you tell, it'd be interesting for me to hear too, if you could tell where this was or wasn't. Like, what clues did you pick up from that recording?
I think it was outdoor, but it was more busy than the previous one. I was listening to maybe even a streetcar came on. Maybe,
Okay.
I don't know if where you were showing passengers.
Streetcar. See, that's interesting. You heard a streetcar. What else did you hear that might be a pinpoint where the
Old-style bicycle bells.
old-style bicycle bells? Yeah. Anything else?
I got a sense of not a lot of cars on the road, but the ones that were there are pretty chaotic. So a place where people, pretend that the rules are suggestions.
Anybody else?
Definitely wasn't Toronto because people were actually talking on the street.
So these are all clues. So you weren't able to pinpoint exactly where it is, but you were able to sense that it wasn't Toronto. You were able to sense that there were bicycles there with old-fashioned bells. So the first one was actually Colombo in Sri Lanka. And the second one was Hardwar in India. And the thing is, what I would do sometimes in order to highlight the differences, I compose with my microphone. And so what I'll do, in Hardwar, for example, there were horses on the street. You didn't get that in Delhi. You didn't get that in a lot of other places. And so what I would do is I would deliberately wait for those kinds of things and make sure that my mic was close enough. And so anyhow, but in terms of the ratio of voice to background sound, those car horns, for example, if you had a very loud person and you were like really close up, you still might have a hard time hearing that voice. So what I would do in a case like that is record the ambient sound and record a lot of it. It's like I'll go out and I'll get 10, 15, it's like I'll do hours and hours and hours of ambient sound because I compose with it, and so I want a wide range of things to choose from. But for backgrounds, I'd want something that spoke of place and also, hi, come on in, that spoke of what the place is, because there are places parts that are less generic than that. And what I would do is I would take the person to a quieter place and then I would mix it in after the fact.
Now, when you record like hours of ambient sound, do you categorize it as in you mark it down, you listen to it and mark time codes? I heard this particular sound at this point, I heard this here. Do you log it that way?
I try to. I don't always, and so I try to keep them fairly short when I don't have time to catalog. But that particular trip, I was in India for 6 weeks, and I was traveling, gathering stories myself. I do both journalism and also sound art, which I just describe as if you take a journalist and a poet and put them together to cover the same event, what you would get is what I do. So it's like it's based in the real world. It's social realism, but it's social realism with some subjectivity on top of it. So that's the kind of art-based stuff that I do.
In regards to art, we're all artists, but we're painting with different paintbrushes here. We're not only analyzing it, we're appreciating it. It's something.
Yeah, and I'll play you one of my art-based pieces. But this particular trip we got funding from from FIDA, the International Development Agency, to do a podcast series called Green Planet Monitor. We're just waiting to see if our second season has been approved so I can go to Central America next time. I was in hotels while I was traveling by myself, and so I had lots of time to write things down and document things. So what I'll do sometimes is keep sound journals. And I try to keep that practice, but when I get busy, I sometimes don't. So that's certainly the best way to do it. And what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll dub it on my computer. The days now that we can plug in with a USB, it's going to be very, very nice as far as saving time. But the thing is, I have to listen to every file 3 or 4 times anyway. So I don't mind transferring it over manually. And I'll sit there and I'll take notes and I'll isolate something and saying at this particular minute there's a particularly good, car or wave on the beach or that kind of thing. And so, but what I'll do right now is maybe just give you an idea about just what I do from an artistic perspective, so that we'll just give you an idea about some of the...
You have 10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes. Thank you for telling me. So anyway, this is about 3-4 minutes or so, which shouldn't take too long.
Is there such thing as too much ambient sound, though? Is it the fine line between it's there, but it shouldn't overpower the speaker, sort of thing?
That's an interesting question, because I went to a conference where someone had said, the words are the thing, the sound is the embroidery. My attitude towards that is then, why aren't you writing a print piece? You know, if you're not really using the sound, you can say the same thing and people can read it. So for me, there's no point in doing sound unless there's a reason to hear it. So anyway, so it's like that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing commentaries or anything like that, but my own particular aesthetic is you put the sound and the words together. If you take away the words, the sound doesn't make any sense. If you take away the words, the sound, and vice versa. So what I try to work for is a fusion of both, so that it's sort of like if you're doing a film, you know? Right. It's like you can't only have one element. It's a whole bunch of elements. But anyway, this is just a quick, number 4. This is one of my favorites. It's commissioned by CDC in 2001. I still think it's one of my best. This is called No Time for Silence, and every single sound was recorded by me. And it's more like, it's a point of view piece. It's a think piece more than it is just a fact kind of thing.
Well, look how about now. Now, this morning, yesterday, last week, now. And so, now.
What's that? No time for silence, no time for waiting.
and then that goes on for 2 or 3 minutes. So that works on a more metaphorical level.
Now, was that done on multi-tracks? Was it
Yeah.
Dun, 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 and then all together?
Yeah, what I use used to be cool Edit Pro, it's now Adobe Audition.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's wonderful because what you do is line up all of your tracks. And it's like, I label all of my files like birds in the mountains, water, poem, blah, blah, blah. And then I almost compose it by instinct, or I'll go insert file and just kind of block them in as I kind of think they should go. And then my first pass through is to say, oh, that made intuitive sense. So I work very intuitively when I work with these kinds of things. Of course, I do much more standard journalism too, where it doesn't get to be that dense or that complicated or anything like that.
When it comes to journalism, does CBC still do we want to chunk a wild sound at the start, then intro to the story, then clip, then sum up? Do they still have the same formulaic?
I would say it's pretty formula, and a lot of the reason for that is when you're doing things in a hurry, then it's just like you have to do things fast. So
CBC still likes wild sound at the start, right?
Oh yeah, all broadcasters like wild sound, but it's the kind of thing of how sophisticated they want to get with it. Mm-hmm.
What's wild sound?
Wild sound is like sound that's out there. It's like wild things for us to capture. So ambient sound is another way of putting it.
Like
background sound.
Yeah, like if you did a story on a construction site.
Yeah.
You'd start off.
Yeah, right. And so what I try to do with my stuff, and sometimes with my journalistic stuff, I feel like I fall into the same patterns too. But it's like to go beyond the, sound, bring in your script, go to a clip, go to more script, go to another clip, more wild sound, script and out. And that's your standard current affairs formula. And the thing is, that's what most people still use. Programs like Out Front, for example, at CBC, where I was privileged to work there for a year, and it was one of the most fabulous things I ever did. I've done lots of work with CBC like back prior to 1990, but that was my most recent adventure with CBC. And the thing is, they have a very, very sophisticated way of using sound, and there are some shows that do that. And then your daily shows, it's like a news clips. They really don't have time to really get into the art quite as much. But just while we're wrapping up, because I know we have to get going pretty soon. But so my point is there are lots of very, very creative ways of using sound, and since we are working with sound, why don't we not just focus just on our voice? Mm-hmm.
Can you define what a mashup is,
mm-hmm.
and how you use it, apart from what we heard just now?
Okay, well, my understanding of the term mashup is it refers to a web page where you bring in all kinds of elements from all over the place. Is that your
No, in terms of sound.
Oh, in terms of sound? I've never used the term mashup before.
Okay.
But anyway,
it's used a lot for music.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's more like if you're taking maybe an old kind of track with a new track and you kind of want to combine the elements of both, or any two tracks really or more. There's some artists that rely solely on mashup. Like there's this one guy named Girl Talk, and he'll just take a bunch of songs and just mix them into several different tracks, or one track combining several different elements. So it's more so on a musical level.
Actually, both definitions are right.
I probably do a mashup, but I'm not using conventional musical sound. Anyway, quick question.
It's sort of sad that it has to be a concern these days, but when you're capturing ambient sound, you have to pay attention. Like, let's say if there's a radio playing in the background or something, and even if there's 5 or 6 seconds of something by the Beatles and should be recognizable, does that, even in that sort of casual context, does that make that sound unusable?
In some cases, yeah. But what I do mostly is, like, most of the sounds that I work with, like my last radio sounds that I recorded were in Kashmir in India, and I don't think anybody's going to find me. So it's like what I do is I sort of take a look at from a risk management point of view, and it's like, what is the chance that anything, like, I don't blatantly violate copyright, but I look at, is this little bit that I use likely going to get to a place where somebody's going to get upset? Most of the time, no, and most of the stuff is original sound, which is not recorded as its original source. Yeah, David? Or Danielle? Yeah.
So if I record an interview in a coffee shop,
the
song's playing, so you can actually tell, that's so such a sound. I can still use it on
I would think so, yeah. I mean, lawyers could get picky about it, but anyway, Ninja?
I think that you can use up to 30 seconds. without royalties, without having to worry about it.
Oh, really? Oh, tell us about it. No, okay.
It's still illegal.
Oh, really? Okay, I
30
understand.
seconds
Yeah.
is not legal.
30 seconds you can probably get away with.
Now.
What you're describing, I would do.
In a coffee shop, if there happened to be another sound there?
Okay, because my understanding is that you can, like this young gentleman was saying, you can use music in mashups, and because they're used in mashups, they're unrecognizable.
It's slippery. Copyright is like an emerging thing. It's a huge issue. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, and I hope it works out well for you. Mm-hmm.
Basically, legally, as long as the information isn't copyright, so music and so on, as long as you're present during the conversation, that's legally all right. If you left the recording device someplace and left the room, that becomes illegal.
Well, that's the media tradition, is to believe that the act of holding a microphone in front of a person's face implies consent. Now, that's not the practice on the internet, though. And so lawyers are making a lot of money out of the internet because new conventions are emerging. But anyway, copyright is a very, very slippery area, and it's like there are some hard and fast rules, but there are a lot more that are not hard and fast and are going to be played out in the courts. So it's like, what I would say is assess the risk, and with me, it's like I always assess where do I think it's going to be going, and it's like certain contexts like artist-run centers and galleries and everything like that, you're going to be able to get away with a lot more than if it goes on CBC or someplace like that. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things. Anybody wants to see more or hear more of my work, I do have a website, magneticspirits.com. I'm also doing a workshop here in Toronto on March 15th with an organization called New Adventures in Sound Art. It's called Inventive Reality, and it's about that kind of thing. If you took a poet and a journalist and sent them out to cover something, what kind of a product would you get? So we're going to be working in groups. They have GMAX, we have some recording equipment. It'll be a small group, hopefully around 6. That's what I want. We have 4 already. But it's $100 for the day, and it will be a really, really fascinating day. They're located down by the Drake Hotel. The other thing is the same organization, New Adventures in Sound Art, does a festival every May called the Deep Wireless Festival. And what it is, it's about taking radio and exploring new things to do with it. They have a great conference called Radio Without Boundaries, which is held on a weekend, and that's what the internet is becoming, is Radio Without Boundaries, because we're no longer bound by time and place. A transmitter and a program which goes out at a particular time, which is, I don't think I'd still be in radio if the internet hadn't come along, just because the internet has given the sound art in particular a whole new lease on life and a whole new audience, like worldwide, and it's very exciting. So anyway, thank you very much for listening, and come pick up a card if you would like, and do stay in touch. And anyway, that was great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.